Okay, I'm going to continue on with cults. This information is from a psychotherapist named Robert J. Lifton. And what he came up with was 8 rules of cults, like basically like he studied them. He studied, actually he's a fascinating guy. He studied veterans of war who had to go through, especially like Korea and China, who had to go through psychological manipulation. Like they were, made to not sleep, or, told that they had to think a certain way or follow certain rules that were inhumane. And over time, the sort of the structure of who they were as a soldier, as an independent force from their own background, their own culture, their own thoughts, feelings, ideals for why they were doing what they were doing, they broke it down. And so they became more like, instead of this, I mean, I know the military breaks them down, but this is in a different way. This is like more like psychological warfare, not just like someone yelling at you to do push-ups. This is like, things like, I mean, I don't know if it's as far as waterboarding, but, definitely the sleep deprivation, limiting food, who they could talk to, what they could say, sunlight, daylight, any kind of environmental controls they could have over them to get them to a point where they became more like communists, like pawns, like they were just willing to just do whatever their particular war culture called for, like, and believe in their ideals. It's almost like mimicking, it's almost like taking a different persona, really, and replacing theirs, like who they've grown up to be, and America's so individualistic. It's more like making it like a group think. So they came out just completely different, and yet not necessarily missing who they once were, which is exactly what happens when I've talked about before with like victims of kidnapping, like is that Elizabeth Smart? There are there's many cases. Was it J.C. Dungree? Where adolescents are taken by force, and then they grow up with their abuser, who's obviously sexually abusing them and confining them and isolating them. And they don't go to school, they live a very isolated life. But it's kind of this similar thing. It's like over a period of time, they break down their identity so much, and they have them on such mind control that even if they're out in public, like there's this one case I studied a lot about. It's horrible, but like a young boy kidnapped, right? And then like this weirdo like acted like he was his dad, and for years this went on, like I want to say it was over 10 years. And he would frequently, the boy, as a young teenager, be bike riding in the neighborhood by himself, and he never once would go tell anybody who he really was, or that he wasn't where he belonged, though he mentally, like, he did know. Well, I think Elizabeth Smart did too. They weren't broken down so much they didn't remember their parents or didn't remember their past. It wasn't that bad. I mean, not, of course it was bad, but I mean, it wasn't a complete disassociation from the real identity. But what it did do is almost make it as if, and this is really important, I think, in terms of cults or in terms of domestic violence, whether it's either party, male, female, whatever, or any kind of situation, narcissistic abuse, or any kind of situation where there's a breaking down, a humiliation, a domination of the other for the benefit of the prior, right? Of the dominant person or the dominant group, right? So the important part is like, it doesn't, and this is when you really know it's gone from manipulation, just standard manipulation tactics like gaslighting or love bombing or, you know, all the different things that happen that we've all heard pretty much over and over again, especially in the media. It moves from that to coercive control, and it even becomes another state, which is such a fear of consequences that it's almost as if the perpetrator or the kidnapper or whoever the person who is holding their mind hostage, right, and reforming them over a period of time, granted, so it's really bad. It's almost as if when they are away from them, it's like they're still there because they're in their mind, and it's like they're control. Like the main point is they actually don't have to be present to have such a psychological hold on their victim, or, you know, whoever the person who is being controlled, right, can be left alone, or in certain situations that are okayed by whoever's doing this to them. Like Elizabeth Smart had to go grocery shopping, and this nut job who had her, he had a polygamous lifestyle. I mean, she was, I think, 14 when she was kidnapped, maybe a little younger. And I mean, he I can't remember what religion he was claiming he was, but they had to wear, the women wore, you know, the covering over their faces, and they had their hair covered, and you know, really covered from top to bottom. So really the only thing you could see was her eyes, or, you know, this part of her face. And so she's not recognizable. Obviously she was with him for a period of time, so it's like she had you know, grown and stuff. But I mean, she would have to go, I think, oftentimes with the other wife to get supplies and stuff, and it's like same thing. She just did not attempt to get away from them. And so, you know, somebody who doesn't know anything about these kind of tactics or understand psychology or how this kind of abuse or, you know, mind control, whatever you want to call it, how it manifests, they would think, well, what's the problem? Like, why? If they're in the right mind, right, and they know who they are, they're not so disassociated or so high on drugs by the perpetrator, or, you know, why wouldn't they try to get away? Well, so, in some instances, they've been told that if they did, the captor would go rape or murder their sister or kill their parents, or, like there's always some sort of overt control over them, like a scare tactic, right? Which may or may not have happened, right? It's like, who knows? And then there's something more subtle, which is just that, their self-esteem, who they are, has been shattered by, of course, constantly being raped and like had food, drink, substance, environments that are like unhealthy or disgusting. You know what I mean? Like they're put in places less light. There's all different ways you can manipulate environments. Like those, what were there, 3 girls who were stuck in that weird house in Ohio, and they were held against their will. I think they were chained up for like, one of them naked for like, I can't remember how many years it was, but it was a long time. And now they finally did get out and screamed and told somebody. But that's definitely, and then Elizabeth Smart at some point did tell somebody. So it's, sometimes it does happen, but it's just not early on, and for whatever and it's usually random reasons, but what makes it coercive, regular manipulation is, I mean, they're terrible it's not good for you, but the things that are done. But once you go over into coercive control, which is really what cults are doing, it's like, it becomes, I think of it more like in prison or something, when you get put in solitary confinement, where it's like, again, it's the manipulation of the elements. It's a strategy over time that is meant to humiliate, humble, degrade, crush the person's ego or sense of self so overtly that normal responses are not acted on, because there's such a breaking down to the point where they just don't care anymore. Like if somebody is denied water or food or something for a period of time, or isolated for a long period, like in solitary confinement, where it's like they emotionally, physically, mentally, it all kind of merges into some sort of suffocation of the kinds of things we all need to have a strong sense of self, or to really have autonomy, really. So it's like, these people are, they study it, like a lot of them study it. Of course, now with technology, that's like really easy to do. But back in the day, you would have to read books or articles, I mean, imprisonment has always been considered, when people are, a lot of these type of people, psychopaths, sociopaths, con artists, etc., etc. I mean, oftentimes they're incarcerated, right? So, and what does that end up being? Like a giant school for psychological tips on what to do to be a better criminal, or they're all just sort of tossing around ideas. It's like a startup company, only in reverse, right? It's like, I don't know, but that's a real thing. So, and like with cults, it can be very similar to a one-on-one between almost like a S&M type relationship, where it's like a one-on-one relationship where one person is breaking down and dominating and destroying the ego of the other for total submission and control. So you could take that model, which is very much like, I mean, now everyone's talking about the narcissistic relationship, but I mean, this is, or in domestic violence, I mean, this is a common model that's used in all kind of social work or whatever, psychology training. But if you take those same principles and then apply it to a group, it's so similar. It's really the same tactics. They're just used over a larger group of people, so it's done differently. It's done in a more obviously a massive, not a micro scale, but there's not much difference. There's not much difference between what happens on like a micro versus a macro level. It's all the same kind of ways to get to the heart of kind of eliminating the core identity of the victim, right? And then saturating them with so much of these different tactics that their core base identity is at first stifled, at first cut off, at first minimized, or in retreat, right? It's being like shredded, they're losing it, it's being shrunk, right? But at some point it goes so far, and that's what a lot of these studies that were done on cults, like I did do a lot of reading about, there's a Japanese, my notes are somewhere, but in Japan there was a cult, I'm not even going to say the long name that they were, but I think it only had like 1,500 members. Oh, it wasn't huge, but it was the single most massive event that killed, kind of like a mini 9/11. It killed so many people and injured so many more, and it was like the cult members took, crazy, these, like, I guess some sort of plastic, it had some kind of bag or something holding some kind of nerve gas or something that they used with the Nazis. The Nazis started this. They created it. It's a kind of a nerve gas that once unleashed it's a biological weapon, right? So this Japanese cult took over 5 trains. I think it was in the morning, and like the cult members just like went on the train. I mean, this is like, I think, I don't want to say what decade it was, but it was somewhere between the 50s and 70s. I can't remember, but I have one right. Maybe it was up to the 80s. I don't know. Whatever it was, they didn't have, the kind of supervision monitoring devices that we have now, right? So it's like each train, a cult member would go on there and they would release this agent and the bag, right? And then they would exit. And I think like under 100 people were murdered, but it affected over 5,000 people with some kind of damage, probably more neurological than anything else. But just the fact that they were even able to do something like that, it's like crazy. And like Jim Jones and the whole thing of the drinking the poison Kool-Aid. I mean, I think it was 993 people were killed, by self-ingesting the poison Kool-Aid. But of those, like under 300, but were adolescents or children. So it's like kind of insane that these people have so much control by using these measures that they can literally convince another person, which is very like Charles Manson, right? I think I talked about this before. Like, Manson was just sitting around at home. He sent this group of women and I think a couple men, if it was one man or more, two, to go murder this whole household of Hollywood celebrity types and people that they knew, or people who worked there at the beach house. It's like he didn't even commit any of these acts himself. I mean, he ended up going to prison for the rest of his life for being the mastermind of it. But it's kind of shocking that somebody could convince another human being to carry out their own agenda, right? That's criminal, that would put them in danger and make them go to prison when they're caught. I mean, it's kind of insane that you could actually convince people to do something that they weren't even thinking. I mean, none of these people were like, this wasn't their idea. This wasn't something they wanted to go do. They just did whatever he told them. I mean, they were very young. They're, I think, in their early 20s, like many of those women. But just the concept that you could be so enamored of, this leader that you would do whatever it's almost robotic, like do whatever they want you to do. Like there's no talk back. There's nothing. It's like whatever they wish, whatever they think. And then a lot of times they'll be lied to so much about, in these cults. They'll tell them, oh, doomsday's coming, or a UFO. They're one of them. There's a UFO's going to land on such and such a date. And like this massive amount, thousands of people like sold their belongings, left their families behind, devoted themselves to this UFO landing that of course never happened. Just the concept that you could brainwash people to the point, and some of it's not even like full brainwashing. It's like just because a lot of it is voluntary, so there's just this weird line. I'm saying it's different than like the Elizabeth Smart where they're kidnapped, because most cults you join unless you're born into them. Now, if you're born into a cult, especially if you're a family like River Phoenix, that's a completely different set of psychological craziness that's going on. And those people actually have the worst time when they leave the cults, for obvious reasons, because they don't even know what a GED is. They don't know how to drive a car. They've never been in society using technology, phones or TVs. Like, they're usually extremely isolated. Like River Phoenix's family, they were with, what was that? Children of God group that later became the International Family. Changed their name. But they were brought up in a way, and and the sexual abuse there started at like 4 years old, so it's like they're not under the same, they're not allowed to read whatever they, anything from the outside world is banned, and even talking to each other on the inside is tightly controlled by, like, they put certain people together in these weird housing situations, and then they're always moving them around. So it's like they make it so you're influenced, like you try to be influenced by outside sources, which would encourage critical thinking, or at least getting you absorbed in the world. You know, much like Mennonites or Amish, they don't want to be part of the regular society, or Orthodox Jews, or, you know, all these different groups. They consider being part of mainstream society as a blight to their cause. You know, it's against their who they are. It's against their identity. It's corrupting them. It's, you know, they're punished by others verbally or psychologically if they do this, because those people are intelligent enough to know that once they're exposed to that kind of information, just like Adam and Eve in the Bible and the tree of knowledge, it's like once they're exposed to other information, it's like their onus of control over them is going to be a giant problem, you know. So I'll go over a few of these other rules, and then I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience with some of this stuff. Okay, the first one is, I can't pronounce this word, Milieu control, Milieu control. This is what we already talked about. The group controls all communication information, the physical environment that isolate them. Mystical manipulation, usually this is a bunch of baloney where mystical manipulation is like supernatural. It's like telling the group, okay, like if you leave the group, you're going to get cancer, or, you know, be punished by the gods, or, you know, something supernatural will come after you. Like, you know, you're going to, you know, it's like creating like a boogeyman, you know, like creating a mystical, almost like consequences, you know, like a karma almost, that if they break the rules, then, you know, bad things will happen. You know, natural disasters could happen, doomsday could happen, you know, like they usually do a lot of mixing the mystical, because a lot of these leaders are based on like Eastern philosophies or religions. They're highly skilled and versed in spiritual language. You know, they study all this stuff ahead of time. They know enough about it to manipulate it in such a high level that they sound like they know what they're talking about. But I mean, that's what people who are pretending to be other people, like they're pretending to be a leader of a great mystical, you know, second coming. Like a lot of times they think they're prophets, they think they're Jesus, you know, and the thing is, they believe it. But we know from studying like mental health, and especially like if people have hallucinations, or especially if they're doing drugs, etc., that the leaders believe it themselves. You know, like they work themselves up into their own ego worship. Like they do think they are. That it's like, it's so believable because they believe it. You know, it's not the same thing as like somebody lying or manipulating you, and they know very well that what they're talking about is absolutely a lie and a fallacy, and it's just a trick to get you to do whatever they want you to do. That's different than people who actually believe it themselves. And well, there was this, I got rolled into this documentary about this vegan chef I was obsessed about from the 90s in New York, and she was a victim of her partner or slash husband, whatever. He clearly had a God complex slash mental illness of many kinds, and he convinced her that almost like there was this government or this secret society or something of elites were watching her and him, and that if she didn't do all these insane things, like he had her like steal all this money from her own business, of course give it to him, big surprise, and then all her workers, who she had a really high reputation. I mean, she was a leading chef, one of the best, most popular at the beginning of the vegan movement, restaurants, lots of celebrities, etc. But he was able to convince her that to pretend to pay these people, but the money, and then keep delaying their paychecks. It's like they're all working for free. He has her going and moving around to these different countries, and just her and her dog. He doesn't even go with her, and it's like every day she gets instructions by the phone of where she's supposed to go for a walk, or whatever whoever these elites are, whatever they want her to be doing. And like, he clearly believed it because he was a complete nut job. And she somehow got convinced, and this is an intelligent woman, that if she did all this, like her dog, who she was like her best friend, or I don't think she had children, would live forever, like not just be cloned, but like her and the dog would like have eternal life or something. And like, I mean, it sounds crazy, but after going through the documentary and listening to it for a long time, it's just like, it almost starts to be like he'll tell her something wacky to do, and it's like, you just know from being a listener, because I listened to an audio, but or watch the documentary. Well, I listened to the audiobook about it too, but you could just tell after a while that whatever was said, it didn't matter how kooky or ridiculous it was, or how many people she was going to hurt. I mean, she was totally destroying all these people's lives, because can you imagine like New York rent, and like all these people are not getting paid at all, and like vendors aren't getting paid, like they don't have the right things for the rest. I mean, like, this is insane. And it's just like, this went on for months and months and almost years, that this played out. And they ended up, well, I mean, the ending's kind of ridiculous, but they were just, I want to say they were near Dollywood, and they were in this like grungy motel or something, and he ordered a pizza, and that's how they got caught. Which is ironic, because of course the vegan's not gonna eat Domino's, which I think is what ended up what they got caught for. But you can tell sort of by watching the documentary and about what the other workers at the restaurant say about him, like just how he was so controlling of her, and of, he took over her finances, he took over, definitely legally, they were married, like he kept encroaching all the, he kept moving the marker slowly, and then at one point, like, she wasn't even running her own restaurant, like he was having meetings with everybody, he didn't even know how to do any of this stuff, and nobody wanted to hear what he had to say, because it's like, he wasn't skilled or didn't know anything about the restaurant business, you know. But it's like, sometimes I think with some of these groups and people, it's like there's this weird social awkwardness where nobody wants to be the whistleblower. Nobody wants to be the one to call someone out or say this out loud. Like, people talk amongst themselves, you know, when those people leave the room, but it's like nobody wants to be the one to confront them or get involved in that way. So it's like, in that way, it really helps them because of that social awkwardness, you know, or like where nobody wants to really be the one to bring up the uncomfortable elephant in the room. Like, so it just goes on and on and on. It really helps the manipulator, right? Because it's like, it keeps this sort of delayed justice from happening, or a scrutiny really of what is happening. And because most of these controlling things that are happening, they're happening in private behind closed doors. And then when the people are in public, there's sort of a fake persona, fake face being put on. So it's always over a period of time, and it's always a sort of a slow siphoning of resources. Like, a lot of these things, if someone were to go in and just say what was really going to happen, like, nobody would want to do it, right? It's like, it's because they're so secretive and they implement these different psychological principles, and they're like tried and true ones, you know, like these are standard practices if you want to, you know, disarm any group over time. Doesn't have to, these rules don't have to apply to a cult. They could apply to, like what I said about the subway nerve gas. It's like, these can be used, like I said, on an individual or a mass group. It's the same tactics. Demand for purity. Okay. This is always a sort of Madonna whore thing that happens with these groups, where it's like, they'll demand purity. They'll demand your complete devotion. Like, you have to be loyal to them. However, they're not to you. And, you know, like the leader or whatever, have multiple, you know, like a harem, but then you would have to be either pure or being sexually exploited, where they have you have sex with other people in the group by their designating them to you, or you're loyal to that leader, but obviously it's not a reciprocal thing. So it's like, either they use purity, which in a lot of these groups, they'll be like, you have to be celibate, or you know, because a lot of spiritual guru type people are. I mean, Gandhi was famously like that for, I don't know, 16 years or something. He was married, but he didn't succumb to the flesh, right? Because of his spiritual devotion. So I don't think the idea of purity and a religious sect is very shocking. That, you know, nuns, priests, I mean, that's a pretty common one. But what'll end up happening is it'll be either or it'll flip. Like, they have to be pure for a while, and then they flip it to then they have to be very sexually promiscuous. And like I said, with River Phoenix's family, they were part of this flirty fishing, which was like recruiting people of high status or money who could contribute. They would try to get these people by having the wives or women in the group, or young daughters, you know, or I guess if they're gay, you know, young men, whatever. Like, these people would purposely almost be sent out to sexually entice others to, if they didn't physically want to join the group, to become huge donors, or do favors for them, like in courtrooms, so they didn't get caught legally. Like, there's just all this bribes and all kinds of crazy shit. But it's like all of that has to come off that principle of sort of a demand for the ownership of your body, right? So you're basically signing over, not only you're giving away your property, moving away from anything you've ever known, working like a dog for hardly any personal money. They probably don't even let you have your own bank account. You know what I'm saying? It's like you do all this, and then it's like all these things combined start to add up. And so it becomes like a blanket of coercion, you know, like where it's like, it's maybe one of those would have broken you down and made you a complete subservient to the group. But if you do all of those things, you know, you're starting to really lose, you know, you give up your moral, whatever your moral compass is, whatever your ideology, however you thought you would live your life as a parent or as a spouse, all of that controlled by the group, you know. You even, I mean, in some of these groups, they gave their children away to go live with other adults, you know, because they were a community, like a village raising children, right? But they were sexually exploiting, you know, children, but they would separate them from the parents. So of course, the parents went to see what was really going on. Let's see what some of the other... Cult of confession. Oh, I really like this one. This is when the group will use, they'll have like these confession times. Okay, I have to admit that, like when I was in, I think the second drug rehab I was in my 20s, they were big into confessions. Like you would have to write these sort of confessional reports about, you know, stand up and read them to the group. If you did something wrong, like if you, you know, whatever, curfews or whatever rules they had, like if you broke them, you would have to do a confessional piece and stand up in front of everybody. Really, these confessional pieces were basically about your past, about your who you were, and it's usually shameful. It's like, oh, I was, you know, addicted to hard drugs, and this is why, and you know, like these are the things I did to get money for drugs, or these are the things I did, you know, and they're usually horrible things, right? Things you wouldn't want other people to know. But that's perfect. That's exactly what these groups want. They'll have these sessions of confessions where the group members, they usually a lot of times target the younger ones, sort of make them on this sort of shame thing. This happened in like 1984, George Orwell, in the movie, they do all this. And in the book where it's like, there'll be these, and this has happened so much in war times, in all kinds of dictatorships, totalitarian authority. This is like a standard one where it's like the whole point is it's to elicit shame, public humiliation, and a huge distraction, right? Because if you're sitting here, all the groups focus on what you did in your past that's so horrifying and so distasteful, right? Everybody's paying attention to that. No one's paying attention to the fact that, you know, again, they're giving all their time and money and bodies to a leader, a higher up group that is actually giving them nothing in return. They're only using them. They're not actually, none of all the work and profit that is accumulated ever goes back to them, to the cult family, you know, and I say family in a broad term, right? The community itself. It's not pumped back into them. It's usually given to those who are not doing the hard work, those who are just, you know, that's why they're the ringleaders. And so that's one of the tactics. There's only a few more I have. Sacred science. This is the group's ideology that becomes unchallengeable truth. Okay, this is usually like pseudoscience. Like I know I went to, when I was, kindergarten, through like junior high. I went to a very fundamentalist Christian church, and they just took out huge parts of history in our history books that they made us buy. My uncle was super mad about it. They just took out huge sections of civilization, like parts they didn't agree with, they didn't think were biblically sound, or, you know, I don't know, they reflected things they didn't want to promote. They just erased them from like they had history books written especially for their doctrine, right? So there were gaping times in the history that we would read and study that, like, there'd be just be this hole, right? Or these gaps where, like, things happen, but it's like, it's, you know, much like how we study so much about the Civil War, but like so little is studied about slavery, right? It's a bias. So they do that with science, anything scientific. Many groups, you know, I want to say it's, who are they? Jehovah's Witnesses, I think, where they only believe in prayer. You can't take medicine or give blood transfusions, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Loading the language, I've already talked about that. That's just thought speak. It's just like they come up with this sort of lofty language, spiritual language that only the group knows. And so and the people in the group might not even understand what they're talking about, to be honest, but they don't want to. Again, that principle, nobody wants to be the one to look dumb or question the group. They just go along with everything. So if something scientifically makes or medically makes absolutely no sense, it's like no one's going to question it, because the pressure to be part of a group, especially when you're already alienated and you've voluntarily taken yourself out of regular society. So it's like, if you want to belong to this group, you know, they really get on people who are isolated, don't have families, you know, they really, or have abuse histories. They really get latched on to people trying to give them the family they never had, the community they never had. You know, it's all very purposely calculated to do that. And one of the best ways to do that is to make up a bunch of stuff about, you know, because if you believed in Western medicine, you might go to the doctor, and if you went to the doctor, then you might be exposed to, you know, society that's not part of the outside secular world. So again, that's a big no-no. So it's like all of this is for a reason. All of these principles tie back into themselves. They're on a loop. Dispensing of existence. Oh, the group decides who's, you know, just a real designation of who's out, who's in, who's spiritually advanced and who is on a lesser rung. Like all these kinds of labeling, false labeling, you know, and again, threats or suggestions that bad things will happen if you don't do exactly what you're supposed to do for the group. You know, you're going to hurt, everyone's going to fall because of you, like it's going to be your fault. And the last one is a no-brainer. Doctrine over person. Again, to get rid of individual human feelings or ideals, you of course would want to supplant that with the whole group think, like whatever is best for the leaders or the group at large. You would want to promote that. All right, I think that's enough for the. Oh, goodness. Sorry. I don't have much time, but I'll talk just ever so briefly about my own personal experience. I had protected by this other extremely violent schizophrenic mother. And, she was I did not live with her full time. I was taken away from her because she gave me a brain injury as a child. But then I had to keep, because I was adopted by her mother, her parents, that they still were actively trying to take care of her and help her, even though she was in another state. And we would constantly go on these trips. I would constantly be forced to be in her presence, or forced to be visiting her, or doing all these things, for a long period of time on like school vacations or whatever. And it would be threatening. Like, she would be physically like beating me and like trying to kill me. Like, she could not stand my existence, And I'm not even saying it was personal. It was like her mental illness. I don't know what that was about. I know it was my whole life. Like, when I was born, I've read my baby book, and instead of like, oh, is it a boy or a girl? When my dad delivers me, she says, is it alive? She doesn't even call me like a he, she, like a person. I'm not even a person. I'm like, it's like a monster. Like, she always had it kind of out for me, because I don't know, I must just reminded her of something she clearly didn't want. I don't know if it was like a reflection of mother-daughters. I don't know what it was, but it's like, or my existence got in her way. I think it was like my existence got in the way of her talking to her voices and being mentally, and like all she wanted to do is just be immersed in her hallucinations and her psychosis, and like my existence was a threat to that, because it implied that she was supposed to be doing something else, like being a mother, maybe. It was just like that. Nothing to do with that, like. But anyway, so because of this, I became more and more, I don't know what you want to call it, disillusioned, rebellious, desperate to find a way to not have to see her anymore, because I was, I thought she was going to maim me, or, really, my family was not going to protect me from her at all. They wanted us to be together, even though she had already tried to, she'd already like messed up my brain, but they still, I don't know, it was like the ultimate people pleasing. They definitely chose her over me, in terms of, they thought like maybe if she was around her child, she would become more, like the mother in her would bring out the non-schizophrenic side of her, and she would be more her true self, who they missed that person desperately. I never knew that person, so I never really cared if she was that person ever again. I just didn't want anything to do with her. I was terrified of her. I mean, she was just like demonic. I was just fear and terror and disgust, repulsion, and these were, or apathy. These were all the feelings I had for her. I did not have any kind of I just wanted to not be placed in any vicinity near her ever again, ever. And when I was 13, 14, I got really worked up about this, and I kind of came up with this crazy plan. I don't know if I got it from a movie or something, where I was like, well, I'm just gonna try to date someone older and maybe get married, and then my family will not be able to make me see her anymore. I will legally be able to emancipate myself. I mean, I didn't even know this is before the internet. I didn't even know what emancipate, like, I guess they could have gotten some kind of paperwork. Now they have that kind of thing, but back then I didn't even know what that meant. I just had this kooky idea that I was going to marry myself out of this situation. But the person that I ended up, I guess the first older man who was interested in me for such a thing, like, he was 5.5 years older than me, and it's like, I just, I was alcoholic, and extremely controlling, domineering, slightly sadistic person. And I was 14, and I just ended up being under his, I'm going to just say it, his mental control. And that's literally what happened. And then I got to a point where the shame was so bad because of some of the sexual abuse that I did not feel, I felt so dirty and like I had done something terribly wrong. My grandparents obviously didn't want me to be with this person, and I was getting it from all sides. I was getting physical abuse from him all the time, and verbal, breaking me down all the time, screaming, yelling. And then, my family was pissed at me. I still had to keep seeing my mom because I hadn't gotten married, so I was not out of that situation. I was being forced to still deal with that. Just like on every front, there was no school people. There's nobody to help me, really. I was just in a weird situation, that nobody I could relate to was in. And I maybe had a few friends who knew about it, who were compassionate, but these were people who had no real power or authority because they were my age. So it was like it didn't really do me any good. So that's one of the reasons, and this went on 3 years, just devastated my psyche. I was not, all the milestones you get when you're growing up, I hit like none of them. I was in like the land of abuse, and I missed all of it. And then I quickly made up for it, like there was a breakup and then like another, like some difficult crap. But I guess at the latter end of my high school, maybe the last year and a half I had of high school, I actually had a real life and like actually went on group dates and like went to the movies and like did stuff, had a more, applied to college. I had like a real, I was back together with my family. They were pressuring me less about my mom. I don't really understand or remember why I got away with that at the very end. I don't know. But, I wasn't completely off the hook, but it wasn't that intense amount of time that I had prior. But I was able to have like kind of a normal life, but it followed me in. And then when I went away to college in New York, then I ended up being raped at the end of the first year, and then having to go through the legal system for all that. And it was just like that brought up all the it just was like I couldn't catch a break. Like I could not get away from people like basically trying to like take me down psychologically and physically and like just fuck with me, like I could not have my own autonomy. I was, whether I was giving away my power or they were taking it with no, limit. It was probably a combination of both, but it messed me. I promise you, I probably wouldn't have been in a lot of other situations in my life that were fucked up, hardcore drug abuse, in a marriage with someone who has 20-year on and off drug problem. I just wouldn't have made a lot of decisions I made. Like, I just was used to being in chaos, and I was used to being controlled and manipulated, and I guess, like, in a toxic environment that I guess I understood that world better than I understood normal people's life, because that's what I was used to. And that's what I I was so codependent and such a people pleaser and so seeking love and affection that, like, always elusive to me. I was always never getting it because I was in these, like, toxic continuing cycles from hell that I, like, had can of worms open when I was 14. So it was like, and I never sort of got over the shame and guilt, and I always just blamed myself. I was like, well, if I hadn't had that stupid idea, like, none of this would have happened. It was like I brought it on myself. I felt like I didn't blame my mom, really, or my family, because I didn't want to. I already felt so guilty with my grandparents. It's like I wanted them to love me. I wanted the love to be unconditional. I didn't want it to be, like, transactional, but it's like it was transactional with what they made me do with my mom. So it was just all ruined. Like, basically, it was just like, then I had, like, a whole bunch of successes with my career and education. It was weird. It was like I would be so, in different times in my marriage, it looked on the outside like we were like a gorgeous couple who had it all, but it was like, behind closed doors, it was a fucking mess. It was just like, I'm just trying to say, I'm going to end this video, but I'm just going to say that, like, I know for a fact that mental mind control we're having someone, and, with this severe sexual abuse, especially violence, so much violence, that all of that in a very young age, it warped my mind. Like, I did not understand, like, healthy. I didn't have any idea with, like, a man and woman treating each other well and being, like, reciprocal, a team that would, be against, try to succeed together. Like, none of that was, like, my reality. And it just, at those critical times when I was growing up into an adult, it was like those were all just jammed with, like, toxic misery. So it's like I just didn't get the skill set, even though my grandparents had a good marriage, and I did know what a good relationship was. I just didn't ever happen to be in one, for whatever reasons. Like I said, half voluntary, half other people trying to dominate me for whatever reasons. I don't even want to know what their motivations were, but, it was like, fucked up. But anyway, all I'm trying to say about all that, I don't want you to blame anybody. I've forgiven everybody. I'm just trying to say that, like, I understand these concepts of, like, complete erasure of yourself, complete, like, not, fear of speaking up, fear of asserting yourself, trying to make yourself small to, not be seen, not be picked on, not be, like, I understand all of that. And I know that if I, as one person, had so much psychological damage from, like, a handful of individuals being like that, to me, it's like, I can't imagine an entire community where your freedoms, money, everything is controlled. It makes so much sense to me personally how you could easily become a victim of that, because they always get you when you're in a vulnerable state, nobody's helping you, you're in crisis. They come in as the answer to your problems. Like, they're gonna make all this go away, like, there's the solution. They always come in. Nobody comes in and is, like, screaming and yelling and degrading you at first. It's like a slow dance, like, it starts off being like, it seems like the answer to your problems, much like I would imagine a cult is, where it's like, if anybody knew, that's why they keep the newer and older cult members, away from each other, and they only have them co-mix when it's like, oh, you're mentoring them on these particular tasks. You're not going to be telling them any of our secrets about what's going on. You're going to just stick to what we tell you your mentorship means. It's very much like that. So I feel like I personally have a huge amount of empathy, and especially, like I said, with the robbery and the violent crime 7 years, and like I am like, I get it, like I understand like how this happens, like I get it. I'm not just an intellectual level, not just a psycho. I understand the actual how yourself can be taken over by another individual, like I said, either by their force or your voluntary offering of yourself, or a merging of both into an enormous nightmare that you'll never be the same person again. I'll never be like who I was before, and I'll never be the 13-year-old who had, I was fucked up by my mom, but like I was never. There's something specially different about these certain types of abuse that are like financial and sexual and like mental. Like there's a special like a special level of hell that you just can't imagine unless you went through it. It's like, and then when you get out of it, it's like you're scrambling to just sort of get your life back together. You can barely process anything, and then regular life is so overwhelming because like you don't have anything in common with anybody because you've been putting on this false front forever. Like, what do you like? You're just pretending that you have a normal life. So it's like you're leading a double life, basically. Like, no one's going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm with this person. It's totally degrading me all the time. Because then other people will be like, why don't you leave? And it's like, when you're in those situations, it's like, you're not going to leave. There's kids, there's money, there's property, all these reasons, And that sunk fallacy thing I talked about before, which was that. And shame, I felt like, well, I put in all these years for this. Surely I'm going to get, the marriage, and I'm going to get away from my mom. Like, I surely didn't throw away my entire life for nothing, which is what I did. But, like, you can't face that shit. So, I don't know. I think other people who don't understand these kinds of controlling environments or relationships should really just keep their mouths shut. Like, if you don't understand it, learn about it or listen to people. But it's like, don't tell somebody who's been through this your non-abusive whatever past opinion, that's judgmental and it's going to make them feel like shit. They already have enough. They already have so much shit to deal with. They really don't need you to add to it with your whatever, why they shouldn't have ever gotten in that situation in the first place. It's just going to be so unhelpful and damaging. So zip it. All right, well, hopefully I've been a source of, psychological, relief for people who feel like they've never heard anybody talk about these kinds of things that made them feel like, if they were involved in this kind of things, they never told anybody, they feel like a fucking idiot. Well, I don't think you are one. So hope that means something, All right, that's it.